Hey, everybody. So thank you for joining me on this wonderful Monday evening. We have another one of our 4-hour roundtables that we're going to get into. And of course, before I get started into that, just real quick, guys, you can check us out now on all our social media channels. We are streaming live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. And you can check us out there at MFSB Live on each one of our social media platforms. Thank you so much, guys. If you are watching on any of those channels, please drop it down in the comments. Let us know. So now let's go ahead and get started because we want to get as much time as we can out of every one of our guests this evening. So let me go ahead and start with our first guest, and I'll introduce him. He is a successful entrepreneur, proven CEO, worldwide motivational speaker, best-selling author who has been a part of successful startups like Priceline.com and Booking.com. Guys, help me welcome to the show, Mr. Jeff Hoffman. How you doing, Jeff?
Good. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening. So let me start next with our next guest. She is a medical startup wizard who's led her Atlanta-based medical and billing team to help companies optimize their coding needs. She is also the COO and co-founder of MedSnake Media. Please help me welcome to the show, Miss Courtney Harding. Hey, Courtney.
Hey, guys, and thank you again, Gabriel, for having me. I'm excited.
No problem. Anytime. Thank you for taking the time to come on. So our next guest, he is a media producer, branding media marketer, and video production director and proprietor of Peace Entertainment Media. Help me welcome to the show, my friend, Mr. Rick Peace Hughes. Hey, Rick, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. How's everybody doing?
Doing good? Doing good? Okay, everybody's doing good. We're good here. Okay, let me start now with our next one. She is a TV personality, actress, former cast member of MTV's Florida Bama Shore, and is a business owner, content creator, writer, and philanthropist of the Rice Foundation. Please help me welcome to the show, guys, Miss Candace Rice.
Hey,
how are you doing?
Hey.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening, of course. And
thank you for having me.
No problem. So let me get to my next guest as well. He is a professional journalist for more than 35 years, has interviewed some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment. He's written songs, authored 2 books, and he's the founder of Blue Panther Media. Guys, help me welcome to the show, Mr. Charles Gentry. Hello, Charles. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great, Gabriel. How are you?
I am doing good, sir. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. And our next guest, he's an experienced security consultant. He is with a background in law enforcement, a TikTok influencer, and host of the Qualified Immunities podcast. Help me welcome to the show, Mr. Greg Ingle. Hey, Greg, how are we doing, sir? You mute your mic. I was just trying to say, how are you doing, sir? Good?
Thanks.
Good. Okay. Okay. My next guest, she is a people strategist, business development manager, natural born leader, innovator, collaborator, host of the Living with Annie Tube podcast, and my Mind Games co-host. Help me welcome to the show, the wonderful Annie Leib.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No problem, anytime. And of course, my co-host for the evening, Mr. Mike Padurano as well. So let me pull him in there if he can. There you are. Okay, guys. So at this point, we are one short, but that's okay. We will go ahead and start the conversation. And, again, before I start, thank you, every one of you, for taking the time out of your evening to do this. This is an important conversation that we are breaching and very important subjects that we're going to cover tonight. So I wanted to start out by saying, oh, crap. Hold on just a second, guys. Issues. That's okay. That's the way life goes. Okay, I'm having a problem with one of my platforms. That's why I'm just kind of trying to get it to go, but we'll go without it, so screw it. All right, so to get started, so I'm going to pose a question to this discussion, and would like to give everybody about 2 minutes to answer this first question to the best of their ability. So let me start out. We're going to start counterclockwise. So I'll start with you, Mr. Hoffman, first. So my question for all the guests is there a right or wrong way to approach the discussion of systemic racism? And do you feel that maybe people have not spoken out about the issue because there's a fear of shaming or retribution? So I'll start with you, Mr. Hoffman.
Okay, yeah, that is an absolutely fantastic question because yes, there are many people who have an opinion and they're afraid to speak because they're afraid if they say it the wrong way, it'll be misinterpreted and it might not be retribution, but it might just be anger. And it could be retribution just because they phrased it wrong. So I literally even had people said, wait, you're going to go on that show. What if you accidentally don't say something exactly the way you mean it? People were even asking me about us having this talk tonight. Is there a risk in doing it? And the risk is in not doing it. The risk is the more people that remain quiet, the less likely we are to ever get all on the same page. So I think, again, that's a great question to start with because people are afraid. And you said, is there a right or a wrong way to discuss it? There is, in the sense that some of the people that I hear talking about this issue are talking entirely from their own perspective and not thinking about how are my words received. The person that's listening to me, where is she from? What is her perspective? And could my words mean something different to her than they did to me? So there is a right and a wrong way. The right way is stop thinking about what you want and put yourself in the other person's shoes before you speak. And second, speak though, because if everybody fears retribution and goes back into their hole, we're not going to make any progress. We got to stand together and we have to speak up to get something done. So that's a great starting question. Thanks.
Great answer as well. So, Ms. Courtney, let's go to you and I want to hear your opinion on this.
So, again, great question, to start with. And yes, there is, no right or wrong way. I think just having a conversation is the most thing that's important, right? That Jeff said before. Yes, when I even said, oh, I'm going to be, on this conversation, I did think about, what are we really going to dive into? How deep am I really going to be able to go with these conversations? And I'm going to, continue to, speak out, make sure that everyone on this panel is able to share their views, because that's the only way all of us are even going to be able to learn about one another, right? And, I continue to also say, when people ask you questions or when people say statements, let's make sure that these things are conversations, right? It doesn't always have to end up with anger. You can agree, honestly, to disagree, and that's okay. I just think that as long as we all share our personal and also are able to, just get like a community kind of role or conversation going, it's just better for everyone. So again, I am so glad to be a part of this panel. I'm so glad that everyone is here, represented. And this is going to be a great way to, just end some things, right? So let's be the change, guys. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Mr. Rick, let's go to you. I want to hear your opinion on the question as well.
Yes, I think it's one where communication is important. However, I also think one should educate themselves on, from a historical view as to where we were, where we're going, and what we're trying to do from this point on. Because I think that history plays a great part in the comprehension of one's reactions, right? I think history plays a great part in the comprehension of one's retributions or what have you, you know what I mean? So when you look at it from a historical view, I think that plays a great impact on how, you expect people to reply when you are looking from their perspective, when you're looking at your perspective. You have to bring some facts and some evidence and, and some current events into your conversation. And that makes it relevant. Mm-hmm. So you can have a dialogue that actually makes sense and is founded on something.
Yeah. So good question. Good answer. So Miss Candace, let me hear from you because you've you've had, of course, battles I've heard in media where you've had to deal with this being called the N-word. So I would love to hear what you have to say about how you feel about this.
When it comes to the conversation of systematic racism, I think that the only wrong way to have that conversation is to deny that it exists. And that goes back to what Mr. Rick was saying about doing your education. Being educated and doing your research prior to having that conversation. I just, I don't know very much about football. So that's not something that I would ever speak on because I don't know anything about it. So I couldn't insert myself in that conversation. However, if it was something that was vitally important to me, like such as me being a host. And so if I got a job with ESPN and I needed to educate myself about it so I could have those conversations, because that's now a part of my occupation, then I'm going to educate myself. And so I think that that's the best thing for anybody to do when it comes to having those conversations. It's never about the right or wrong way. And I understand what Mr. Jeff was talking about as well, about how it can be perceived incorrectly. But as a millennial, as the one that's a part of the Cardi B generation, we appreciate authenticity, and authenticity is what's most important. So Jeff being a white male, if you were to just be honest about the truth and, express yourself, if you want to address white privilege and things like that, authenticity is what younger people are caring about now. We're not really fond of the BS and the political correct words and all of that. We don't like that. We like the truth being exposed for what it is. And so what Jeff was saying, the fear of being misconstrued, that can happen. But I feel like as long as you are authentic in what you are saying, I think that that's the best way to approach the conversation of racism. Because if you are educating yourself, then you understand the laws that have been put in place, the redlining, the gentrification, all of that would be something that you would discuss if you did your research.
Yes. Awesome answer. Yes. And Mr. Gentry, let's go to you. How do you feel about this? Let me hear from you.
Well, first of all, Gabriel, just that people are at the table talking and being in a conversation, is the right thing to do. We can talk about later if you said the right thing or, if it wasn't interpreted right. But just the fact that you're at the table means you've taken a positive step, because without dialogue, nothing's going to happen. So we have to get past our feelings of, wow, maybe I'll be misinterpreted. Maybe somebody will shame me. Maybe I'll hurt. Hey, forget all that stuff, man. Just come to the table and let's talk about coming up with a solution. That's what it's all about.
Awesome answer. Miss Leib.
Hi. So I heard each and every one of you, and I can appreciate everything that you've said. I do believe it's about the conversation and actually having it. I also think that it's about your approach. So when you're approaching these subjects, I think that it's important to approach this with curiosity and with open-mindedness. And if you go into something and you're asking questions instead of having this opinion and drilling it into somebody, or coming in with like Courtney said, like everybody's mentioned already, with these pre-stated beliefs and these notions that you already have. I mean, everybody has unconscious biases, right? So it's important to come in with someone said in a meeting I was at the other day, they said, ask how questions instead of why questions. And I thought that was such a good way to go about things. How did you come about feeling this way? How did this happen? Be curious, come at it with a curious state of mind. I think that is a really good approach to have, and it gets people's backs down a little bit. And then you can have, like you just all said, a conversation.
So awesome answer. Mr. Padurano.
Well, I mean, when we created these roundtables, right, the purpose for me was to make sure these conversations happen.
Yes.
I didn't want to sit by and not allow these to happen, or sit by knowing that I could help make them happen and not do anything.
Yes.
At the same time, I also knew that I had a lot to learn. And if I wanted to teach my children a better way to do things in a better world going forward, I needed to learn from people who experience different things in different ways and be open-minded enough with empathy and compassion to be able to understand, absorb, and learn from their experiences. And that's really the core foundation of having these conversations. And to be honest, I didn't care if I came across the wrong way. I didn't care if I came across ignorant. I didn't care if I came across insensitive, because at the end of the day, every episode that I do and every conversation I have, I'm learning and absorbing something from it. And that is me evolving as a human being. And that's what we all need to be willing to do.
Awesome answer. Mr. Ingle.
I mean, I'll reiterate what everybody just said. It's all about learning and being willing to have a conversation that you're not comfortable having, because everybody has predisposed bias whether you realize it or not. And that predisposed bias might be because of how you were raised or experiences you've gone through in your life. But I mean, I was a cop for almost a decade. There's bias in there that I have to recognize and understand that it's there because it got trained and drilled into me. Mm-hmm. And you have to sit down and be willing to put aside everything you know about legal, non-legal, right, not right, to have a conversation about something that's actually true versus what the law says is true. So it becomes an evolving conversation, and I'm not going to say everything right or do everything right, but we have to be willing to have it, because if we're not, then we're just going to keep going with the status quo, which obviously isn't improving anything.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a perfect segue into my second question, and I'm going to start with you, and I'll go backwards because this is where I wanted to head in the first place. So my second question is, do you feel that some of the initiatives being put into place in some of the major metropolitan area police law enforcement agencies, is it a step in the right direction, and do you think we need further reform?
The further reform question is always going to be a yes, because law enforcement, the sad part about it is we now talk about law enforcement as law enforcement and not peace officers. And there's a drastic difference between being a peace officer and being a law enforcement officer. Some of the reforms are working, but this all goes back to reform is only possible to succeed when there's not an adverse reaction to it. Because if you have an adverse reaction to it, all it does is give, and I hate putting sides in anything because I don't think there are sides anymore. I think it's a human side. But if there's an adverse reaction to media being able to spin anything, like I saw a network today spin New York City got rid of their crime task force, and shootings have increased by 200%. Well, that was going to happen anyway. All you're doing is taking a statistic and spinning it to fit your narrative. Versus let's talk about how we became law enforcement to begin with, and how that hat has to be, you enforce the laws that most people don't understand. I mean, I was in it for a decade. I don't understand most laws. The laws are so innumerable that you're never going to be able to understand what you actually took an oath to enforce. So that turns back into going, it inadvertently affects poverty different, which means cops get lazy, humans get lazy, they take the path of least resistance, therefore laws inadvertently affect poverty more, which is mostly minorities. So when you hear cops out there that are like, oh, well, this will never work, this will never work, this will never work, it will if you just let people live their lives. And I think power's a hard thing to let go of once you have control of it, especially the power to legally end somebody's life. Yes. And that turns into especially police unions and police boards are not going to give up that kind of power easily, because it's for the safety of the public versus what's it really about. They don't want to lose the ability to pull you over for that tag light.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Padurano.
Can you repeat the question one more time? My 3-year-old slammed her hand in the presser.
That's okay. I said the question was, do you feel the initiatives being put in place in some of the major metropolitan area law enforcement agencies is a step in the right direction? And do you feel we need further reform?
I think we're barely scratching the surface. I don't think we're really reaching the systemic issues. I think we're doing a shallow surface dive to satisfy the masses right now, and I don't think that we're doing a deep dive on the real core issues. I think there's much deeper issues at root. It's where these systems were created, when they were created, for what time period they were created, who the population and the masses were at that point. And I feel like these need to be evolved to the current population, current economic, socioeconomic issues, and just come to the next level.
Yeah. Miss Leib.
So, I mean, I couldn't have said it better than Mike. We're just barely scratching the surface. There's not enough being done. Of course, there's more attention brought to it now, but the question is it going to be, pushed through? Or is this just going to be talked about for a while and nothing really done? And I don't know exactly the statistic or the information, but I heard someone say something about certain things not having been reviewed, ordinances or laws, or I think it was Greg, since the 80s on his podcast. Something had not been done since the 80s that, like, obviously 40 years ago really needs to be reviewed and looked at. Things have changed exponentially. We need to take a look at things. We need to revamp in a major way and dig deeper than is happening right now.
Awesome. Great answer. Mr. Hughes.
Yes, sir. So I concur. I think that, reform is something that is needed, but it's something that may need to be looked at from a different perspective, right? It's 2020, right? So a lot of times you have regime change, right? One person in, one person out. So when one person comes in, they manage it one way. When another person comes in, they manage it another way, right?
True.
Well, what about the way that is beneficial in terms of combating or changing the actual system? Because when they come in, they're managing the system, right, a different way. It might work for some generations at that time, but not generations of another time, or some people of this time or not another people of that time. Clinton versus Reagan and all that type of stuff, right? So basically, we need to look at more of, like they said, digging deeper, not just looking at things from a face value, but like digging deeper and looking at things about trying to actually change the system, right, to one that works, right? We know that it's a capitalistic society, it's capitalism, right? But how do we make that work for the lower class, right? Why do we just talk about the middle class when it comes to voting and trying to get someone's vote, right? What about, there's no more speech of the lower class, right? Or the upper class, right? And in some cases, in some countries, there's not even classism, right? Because, when distribution of wealth goes out, right, they have a system for the poor that they give money to the poor, So maybe we need to look at those things, because the biggest speech and the biggest thing that Martin Luther King was about to get into was, if we look at poverty, then all these other things might fall in line. They might fall in place.
Yeah.
Right. So it's looking things from a different perspective and looking at something that is more dealing with changing the system and not managing the system. Otherwise, we're just back again to the one person in, one person out, who manages the best. And it doesn't matter what color they are.
Yeah. So, Miss Rice. How about you, Miss Rice?
Yes. Literally, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi. Yes. Can you hear everybody?
Okay. You can hear me. Okay. Sorry. The response is a little slow on my end. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
So I literally agree with, like, Rick said everything that I was. Wait, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. I know it just kind of seems a little weird.
It's like literally 10-second delay. So I'm trying to, like, make sure. Okay, but yeah, I agree with everything that Mr. Hughes said. The only thing that I would add is pretty much there needs to be retraining. I'm not too sure what that looks like. I haven't had the opportunity to talk with a police officer. I'm arranging an interview with one right now. But
Okay.
I think that there is, aside from poverty and aside from class, there is a way that Black and brown people are perceived when it comes to threat levels. And I think that that is something that we all have to look within ourselves and ask really tough questions to ourselves, and probably police officers as well, as to how they handle certain people, because I think that's the only thing, that's where a lot of young people are upset, because a lot of times it's not about class. It really is about the aggression level that is taken on Black and brown people when they are arrested. So that's the only thing that I think that I would add to what Mr. Hughes said.
All right, Mr. Gentry.
All right. Well, to me, first of all, if I'm a doctor and someone comes in and says, hey, I'm having pain down my left arm, severely bad, as a doctor, you're saying to yourself, okay, this person is probably having a heart attack. So you're going to treat the heart. You're not going to treat the arm. That's just a symptom of what's going on, And so I think first of all, the problem is you have to go back to the beginning. It's a people problem. You have to get the right people on the bus and get the wrong people off of the bus. So forget about the training and what's happening down there. First of all, you got to hire the right people as peace officers. And I'm sure that Greg will concur, having been, a police officer himself. Just because you put on a badge doesn't mean you're going to be a great cop, right, Greg? you have to get,
100%.
you have to get the right people in and get the wrong people off the force. If you're a hammer, you look at every problem as a nail. You got it? And you're going to just hammer it down. And that's your way of taking care of things. We're talking about bad cops. This is totally overshadowing the fact that we have great cops out there who've been doing the right thing for decades.
Yes.
And we look and say, well, there's a problem with the way they're policing. No, there's a problem in that you have some bad people on the police force who never should have been on there to begin with. Okay. So that's where the problem begins. First of all, how do I relate to you as a person? And if as a person, I see a person of your color as a threat, that's a problem.
Yeah.
See, so first of all, again, let's get the right people on the force, and by all means, get the wrong people off of the force. They look at somebody's background and say, hey, this guy had white supremacist leanings. Well, how did he get hired on the police force? What is he doing there to begin with? See, so first of all, get the hiring process right. That's the first thing you have to get right before you even deal with the training.
It's Herring.
All right, Charles, you just killed it, okay? Because I love everything that you said. So, again, yes, everybody is a person. And I do believe that, again, people are people. And when you do hire people that are wrong for that set of employment, just like, you're not going to hire me for ID because I'm not going to do well with it, right? It's very, to me, it's very simple, but we'll go, since you started from the beginning, Charles, I'll start, just at step number 2. When you see there's an issue, deal with it. Talk to the person, figure out what in God's name is going on. Because, I'm also seeing that, yes, it is few, but a lot of people are doing things that are completely, unjustly and wrong. And now we do have cell phones. So there's a lot, right? We see a lot of things going on. But the biggest thing is what is happening to these people. Because, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I'm either fired. I don't get business, right? I'm not still here. I'm not still able to produce the same negativity on a community, right? I used to be a social worker. If I abused somebody, I would be gone. No questions asked. So my biggest issue with the change is just like Charles said, number one, the hiring, but then also what is the disciplinary action of things that go wrong? You see it. You see hotheads around, right? We've all seen them walking around. So you know who they are, whether you work with them, right? Or if they're on the police force, call it out, say what it is, and you might save a life. And that's kind of my issue with all of it, and also the oath that they take, right? I understand, we're a team, right? I was on a track team. Yeah, we are all together, but it's wrong is wrong. I'm still going to call you out if it's wrong. I'm going to call out my best friend and be like, you know what, you're wrong. But that's not also happening. So there's also a community of, the department that will not hold them accountable, like your peers, and then also the upper management. So that's what I would like, definitely to change, and what I don't see right now.
All right, Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, so what disappoints me the most, that why does somebody have to die for us to have this conversation, right? When we have this conversation, when someone dies, when we don't have it, or that we don't hear about people that died or mistreated. It's only if someone catches it on video. We don't even know how often this bad treatment happens, and how much, to Courtney's point, the blue code or whatever, that people, we don't know that. Sometimes people say that, bad cops are protecting bad cops. That isn't really even the point. The point is that Courtney made a point about business. How much, if any of us made one of these mistakes in business, we wouldn't have a company anymore. So what we do on the flip side in business is we constantly review ourselves for continuous improvement. So I guess my point is, your question was, does reform go far enough? And I think all of us agree that it doesn't, because the reform should be an ongoing, continuous process, not just when somebody gets videotaped doing something wrong. That bothers me a lot. The other part of that is that, I'll tell you what I would like to see as part of this process. We know the bad examples, but you know what the media doesn't like to show, or just doesn't show? I would like to see some examples of cities where the police force and the citizens, regardless of color, have found a really good relationship and where it works. Because when we talk about reform, it's important to make a list of everything they're doing wrong, but somebody somewhere is probably doing this right. And we should be highlighting that so people know how a community is supposed to behave together. So I think that's part of it. Let's find, if there are good examples out there, let's make sure that people see them. So when we say in reform, what should it look like? What are we reforming to? Right now we know what we're reforming from. We're saying the way it is now doesn't work, but I'd like someone to spend more time on what are we reforming to? Because you guys said a lot of times we're seeing a lot of super fast reaction just because everybody's under pressure. Not necessarily that it's in their heart. They're just doing it because they're under fire and they have to do something. I'd like us to see those good examples. What is the end point? And the reform should be something that has to go on continuously. Even when things are going well, we constantly look to make sure we're doing it right. And any opportunity we can improve our communities and our policing, we should be taking that, not just when things go bad.
Yes. So I'm going to open up the forum a little bit to conversation here. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on, because this was such an interesting fact, the last time that I had a conversation with Mr. Greg, was being that a lot of law enforcement officers are in very dangerous, very high tension situations, their jobs and what they do. We had talked about mental health, because I think that's kind of a stigma we should look at when dealing with law enforcement, because again, that's a whole other thing about talking about people who, again, have the power to take somebody's life. They have the power to do a whole lot of things. And one of the things that I had discovered was that, yes, they do offer mental health services, but it's something that's frowned upon inside most of these departments. It's something that floored me. I was literally shocked, saying that, if you have this, if you take somebody's life, or if you get in a situation where you need that, and there might be somebody stuck with PTSD, if you talk about these issues, you're called a quote unquote, excuse my language, a pussy. That is, to me, that was one of the worst things that I heard. It really floored me, because these are people that are controlling, enforcing, and are watching over most of our lives every day. And it was a scary thought to think about. I mean, I would love to hear Greg, and again, to each one of you, open this discussion and see what you guys think about this.
The problem when it comes to mental health, like within law enforcement, is it's never going to be okay. And there's studies out there that prove the idea of once you do this job for so long, at least the current way it's done, your mentality fundamentally changes. And it gets to the point of you no longer have the empathy because you're just doing your job. So there's somewhere, and there's numbers between 7 to 10 to 12 years of what law enforcement calls the complacency period, because most cops who get shot or killed on the job are between 8 and 12 years on the force. They become complacent because it's no longer about that drive, that motivation. You lose the empathy, and it becomes very, very hard to keep it when a compliment within law enforcement could very well be taken in the rest of the real world as a huge insult. Like, the cops are mean to each other. It's a totally different sense of humor, and it turns into, well, why do you need help? What's wrong? Go drink a beer and get over it. Like, go come to the bar with us and get over it. You'll be fine. Which is why there's also a systemic substance abuse problem within inside first responder communities. It's a very, very old school look at shut up and be a man. Even to female officers, it's shut up and get over it. Like, you signed up for this. If you don't want it, leave. Well, you get what I was 9.5, almost 10 years into my career when I was like, F it, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore, because even if you go, and to go back to what somebody said, even if you go to the theory of let's hire the right people, there is one background check that got done on me the very first time I applied, and they did not go through my social media. They did not go through anything. It's called a triple I. It's what's done by the FBI. It was one background check, and it said, okay, you're fine. That's how I became a cop, was one background check and an interview. And a PT test. Like, it's not, and the other side of that is what happens when you have a bad apple. I wore a wire for State Bureau of Investigation for 6 months trying to pin a bad cop. I had him on tape admitting to, and he was a supervisor, he admitted to telling me to lie on a report, telling me to lie on an affidavit, telling me to lie on a search warrant, sexually harassing a minor, sexual propositioning of a minor, and a direct threat on the life of the President of the United States. It wasn't the department that stopped the charges. The district attorney, the assistant district attorney, looked at me and said, there's not enough evidence to prosecute, when we had him on tape doing it. So there's a whole, everybody talks about qualified immunity. There's a whole unspoken qualified immunity where DAs don't prosecute cops. They just don't. So this is an entire system issue with inside of law enforcement, and mental health is like the crowning achievement of it, because if you can't fix how a human being thinks, then you can't fix the human being.
Anybody else? Open forum. You guys can.
Are we going in order, or how?
No,
Right now?
It's open forum right now. You can ask any question.
This is my bread and butter right here. Mental health awareness is probably my biggest thing that I'm out there fighting for, and I'm a crusader for this. So this is a way bigger issue than the police force. It's sad to hear about, but and it's really disappointing, but it's not surprising to me at all. So the overarching, this is what the majority of, unfortunately, how society looks at mental health. And the majority of people see this as, using the P word, as Gabriel used it. That's what you are. You're not macho. You're not strong. Get over it. And, you know, this bigger overarching issue is that I have a question. Here's my question. How come in a business we can be put in training and development, and we have to do it, and that's part of our job. We have to go go to a class or be put into a training and development course, right? Why aren't there mandatory mental health education within law enforcement if it's this bad? That's my question. I don't understand. Is there, Greg? I mean, you have
because it turns into. I mean, you see bad stuff. I'm not going to say you don't see bad stuff.
Exactly.
But it's a very, very, like, I grew up with boomers. I'm adopted. My parents are in their 80s. So it's a very, very one of those mentalities of you're fine, get over it. The pressure that you have every day of you're putting on at least 30 to 40 pounds of gear, you're putting on Kevlar with the idea that you might take a round with that, like you might get shot with that on. You're putting on a gun.
More of a reason for them to have mental health protection. This is what I don't understand.
It's the total opposite. And some places like out in California, they've started doing it, but it takes the problem becomes the way gun laws are structured. And this is the actual nexus of it. The way gun laws are structured, if you become deemed mentally unstable, you can't carry a gun. Therefore, you can't go do your job because I don't think there's an unarmed police department in the entire country. So what do? You're going to hide it because, oh my God, I can't lose that gun. That gun's my job. And therefore that gun becomes your identity because it is your job. So you're not going to go ask for help because the very second you do, especially with inside of a department, even the departments that have internal psychiatric evaluations, internal mental health units, politics happens more in police than it does in politics. And if there's
so how do we change this? How do we change this is my question.
You totally outsource it. You totally outsource it. And it almost has to be anonymous because you don't need to be in a position where you're in a mental health crisis, because I've seen this between cops and veterans for my entire adult life. You get to the moment you're in a mental health crisis, you're not going to go to the department shrink because the department shrink is best friends with your lieutenant and they go drinking together, and it does not matter what law there is, they're going to talk.
I'm talking more about the education around mental health awareness.
You have to drastically revamp the entire police training system.
Right.
I went to the FBI's hostage negotiations course, which is a very, very limited course. I should have been taught that day one because that is how to talk to people.
Sure.
Versus it's a culture where the use of force continuum means you have to stay one step above it, which means inadvertently, what do? You escalate it. It never fails. You escalate it. And the only thing that ever stops it is either fear or death.
Right.
And that's the entire culture behind law enforcement. And people don't want to talk about that.
That's the whole thing. The root of the issue with it is fear.
It is
of this understanding. I mean, that's why they are the way they are, why this mentality happens, because of fear.
The biggest thing I used to tell people is law enforcement is a culture and a society that is 100% predicated on violence. It's 100% predicated on violence, no matter how you look at it, what you were taught. You get taught it everywhere. You ask somebody to do something, you tell somebody to do something, then you make them do it.
Right.
Therefore, your end result is violence. There's no other way to get out of that versus the shooting in Atlanta. You have a guy who's DUI, okay, he stole your taser. You have a department big enough, set a 2x2 block perimeter and find the drunk guy. Don't shoot him in the back.
Right.
Like but you've got this mentality because what was I trained to do if somebody took my taser or tried to take my taser? I was trained to shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're talking about a drastic, and that's the thing people, unless you've been in law enforcement or some form of it, you're like, well, why did he shoot that guy? He did exactly what taser and what defense instructors have taught him to do for a decade. He did exactly, and he did. The only thing is like George Floyd. Nobody ever, I went to SWAT school. I went to advanced certified SWAT school. I'm an advanced long range marksman, which otherwise known in the normal world as a SWAT sniper. Like I've got the resume that most cops would kill for but I never got taught de-escalation till after I knew how to effectively kill somebody. There's your problem.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know,
There's your problem.
If lethal force is your first remedy, we've lost the battle to begin with already. You know, if the answer is shooting someone in the back, and that's the first thing you pull out of your toolkit, you know, we have a force that's just out of control.
And then you also have the other side of this, and this just happened 20 minutes from my house Saturday, I think. A cop shot a guy in Walmart. Like, if you haven't seen this video, it's a Del City, Oklahoma Walmart. And he goes out to arrest him for shoplifting. It's less than a couple $100. It's a misdemeanor. He's trying to yank him out of the car. He can't get him out of the car. The guy backs up. The only thing that ever hit the officer was the car door. But he unholsters, and I can tell you from his body language, he was gonna shoot from the second he unholstered. He fires 2 rounds, and then he fires 9 more at the car driving away. The only thing that saved that guy's life was his headrest, because his cousin went live on Facebook, and a round had impacted the back of his headrest and almost come out the other side. You have an entire, and people want to say the warrior culture is bad. You've got an entire problem with it. You've got an asinine amount of laws. I mean, the statistic is after 4.5 hours on the phone with the Library of Congress, federal laws and regulations by themselves are somewhere between 3.3 and 3.9 million. And the last time anybody tried to count them was in 1983. That's not including state, local, municipal. And guess what a cop's job is? When we raise our right hand, I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution and enforce all state, federal, and local laws to the best of my ability. Therefore, there's at least 3.5 million federal laws that I was charged with enforcing, and I can't tell you 5 of them.
Right.
But it's an entire system that now it's up to me to go be willing to commit the violence on another human being because of a policy made by politicians who will never have to enforce it. But I have to go commit that violence on another human being. And what am I taught from day one? Don't trust anybody until you cannot trust anybody until they give you a reason to trust them. And if all else fails, shoot your way out of it. And is that an official doctrine? No. Is that what I get taught? Yes.
If that's the training, then the miracle is that we don't see more shooting.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
100%.
You know, that's the miracle. It's like, why aren't we seeing 5 or 10 a week? You know, if that's the training, because you're not training officers to respond to people as human beings.
No. You dehumanize it from day one.
Okay, I'm drunk. I was driving. I'm out of the car. I'm not driving anymore. You know, I'm drunk. Take my keys. I say I live 5 minutes from here. Take my keys and send me home. Hey, man, say, yeah, give me a ride, do something. But that situation should never end up with you trying to cuff the guy for what? For being drunk?
This was my whole thing about that. I don't know if anybody else saw this. It was in Colorado. There was a cop that was caught DUI on duty. Like, it was in Colorado somewhere that he had an alcohol problem and everybody knew it, and he was actually passed out behind the wheel of a cop car, DUI.
Saw that, right.
And you know what he got? A ride home, and he was back on the job in 2 weeks.
Hey, Charles, you're bringing up another aspect of mental health that we're not talking about here, which a lot of officers, we're getting ready to announce a big sort of program on this. But and you guys, here's what you just hit on. We talked about the mental health of the officer, and we talked about them interacting with people like people. But every one of them have told me that a high percentage of the recidivism, right? The career criminals, the people that never get any level of reform have mental health issues.
Yes.
And they have zero training in diagnosing that. So there's 2
100%.
sides of mental health.
Right.
One is that our officers, if I as an officer recognize that this person had a mental health issue, I might treat them with more human care than just assuming they're violent criminals. Sometimes they literally just have a mental health issue. They're not actually going to harm you. They don't know what they're saying. So we've talked about treating the symptoms and not the disease. mental health is a massive disease no one wants to talk about on the streets. And a lot of officers recently have said to me, if I had training in recognizing and responding to mental health, I could treat people properly instead of assuming everyone's a violent criminal because I don't understand why they're behaving that way.
Yeah,
so we need to
100%.
add that level of mental health as well. That's what's causing so much of the reason the person got arrested in the first place.
Right.
And I'm sure all of you remember the Black woman who had a mental health problem and she was threatening the police with a screwdriver. Remember? And they just unloaded on her. Okay, just gunned her down. Okay, first of all, I'm sure that policemen have some training in self-defense, right?
Yes.
Okay, if you can't take down an old lady with a screwdriver,
Again,
You've got the
why are
training.
you on the force?
You don't have the mentality.
right.
Because they teach you to fear people from day one. I'm not kidding. The very first day of my academy, there's a video from, I want to say it's the 90s, 80s or 90s, and it's a Vietnam veteran in Georgia, Alabama, deep south, gets pulled over, has a flashback, comes back and unloads on the officer. He ended up killing him. He went to death row and was executed. But you can hear the screams of the cop as he's dying after the suspect drives away. That was day one. And you have this, and you get told if you can't handle that, this probably isn't for you.
Right.
Well, the actual likelihood somebody's going to shoot you on a traffic stop is less than 5%.
Right.
Well, you know,
That depends on what color you are.
yeah.
The rate goes up.
The likelihood that somebody will shoot the officer is less than 5%. The likelihood that I pull any of you over and you pull a gun out on me is less than 5%. It's not there. But you get this mentality of you do not trust anybody until you absolutely, and they use Reagan's line all the time, trust but verify. But it doesn't work as a human being because the most skittish people in the entire world are rookies because they walk out into the street with the mentality of every single one of you could kill me.
Correct.
Right.
And it only compounds upon that when you have veteran officers like, well, don't trust this neighborhood or don't trust this block or, have your gun. Like there was one time that I was taught in a certain area, in a certain how to do things, that I should have my gun unholstered sitting behind my leg on a traffic stop. You know how many times I ever got shot in that area? I didn't, because you could talk to people like human beings and generally they don't want to shoot you.
No. This is very interesting because I did crisis for a really long time. So what I did was I went to, homicidal, suicidal, houses. And a lot of times when I got there, after the police officers, it was almost a good thing, right? Because the chaos kind of went down. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. Give me a second. What's wrong? People could take their medication incorrectly. Anything could be happening. A UTI, people. I mean, over 70. You're crazy. So I don't really understand. I hear you, Greg. I hear you. It's just so hard for me to just fathom, just always being scared every time you go to work. So then I'm like, well, then why do you go to work?
It goes from fear to arrogance.
Okay.
Because you understand that you are faster than 99% of the people, unless you accidentally pull over somebody that was SEAL Team 6.
Right.
That is just out to kill you.
Right.
You understand that you are faster, at least with a gun,
right,
than 99%. Because we got told, go home, unload your firearm, and sit in your living room and do nothing but this. And it was our homework one night from our academies. You were literally sitting there drawing and dry firing, probably close to. My wife said, I don't know how many times I did it. She goes, you probably did it close to between 10 and 15,000 times your first year. Because it's grained into your head. If you cannot get that firearm out, then you're dead. Like if you cannot get it out and get it on target, you're dead, which turns into you have a mental aspect of, well, I'm better than you. I'm faster than you. And it goes back to the root cause of, well, officer, why are you talking to me? Oh, because you violated this ordinance or this law or this law. And it's petty and it's bullshit 90% of the time. It's actual violent crime keeps going down and has gone down since the 1970s. But we can't find one legislative body that has not added a law since then. Like they keep stacking and stacking and stacking. So you can't, I've told people this for years, you can't leave your house, drive to your closest gas station or your closest grocery store and drive home and do it 100% legal. There's no possible way.
Yeah, right. And for me, you know,
like
for
you're
me,
living in a police state.
Yeah, and for me and my generation, it was, you know, everything Greg said was the norm, right? A statistic to others, or, you know, education to others, or, you know, mental illness to others, or whatever. But for me, it was a norm. It was a mentality, as expressed earlier, right? So when you go on from that first question that was asked by Gabe, right, the perspective is that, okay, it is what it is, you know, because we, you know, if you look at, you know, movies like Boys in the Hood or Crenshaw, or areas like Compton or California and LA or whatever, when you listen to certain rap songs and this, that, it's just, it is what it is. It's the natural way of life, right? So that was ingrained in us growing up, that we have to deal with that. We have to, that is part of the norm. That is our mentality, right? So that is a mental illness.
It is.
Right? A mental illness that we accepted, you know, this notion or this phrase of it is what it is.
Yep, it is
right?
what it is.
You know, there was a phrase that, you know, when I was in California, you know, and this phrase that LA rappers would use as the norm, and it was a saying, and they call the police officers, they call them one time. And I was like, okay, what do you mean by one time? He said, because you only get one chance, one opportunity to either get away or do something wrong, and then that's your hide. You know what I mean? So basically, you know, that is the mentality that, you know, and part of that is comes into a cultural difference, right? Part of having a dialogue about some cultural difference, because one thing I mentioned last time on the roundup was that some people run, some black males run because they scared that they are going to get killed.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
Whereas a police officer, or, you know, in the courtroom, right, you know, you are seen as guilty if you run. Why did you run is part of the interrogation question. Right?
Yeah.
You know, and then they hammered that on you.
Yeah.
Right? And one thing that I grew up with was that, in terms of mentality and mental illness and stuff of that nature, was most black males have the same story.
And I want to hear Mr. Charles' opinion about this, because again, guys, if you don't know, Charles' background is he grew up with one of the founding members of the was it the Crips?
Crips, right?
Yes. So they grew up in that society there. So I want to hear a little bit more about your opinion about this, how you feel about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, and that's Raymond Washington, who was co-founder of the Crips. We went to elementary school together, and then we separated it at middle school or junior high, and then we went to the same high school together. And by the time we came back together, I was an athlete and he was a gangbanger. You know, so it's just two different paths, coming from the same neighborhood, same background, you know, just two different paths. But, you know, I would say this to add upon what you were just talking about, Rick. Hey, Annie, when you get stopped, I'm sure the first thing in your head is not, this can end up very badly. Okay? Routine traffic stop. You know, you blew a stop sign or something. Hey, this could end up with me losing my life.
Yes.
As a black man, that's the first thing you think of. It doesn't matter what you're getting stopped for. You know, I blew a stop sign, my tail light is out. If you get stopped by a cop, as soon as you see the lights, right, behind you in the mirror, your heart rate's going up already.
Yes.
See, this could end up badly. So that's why it would be hard for me to explain to Annie right? Why I'm feeling this way.
Right.
Because that would be totally foreign for her to get stopped by a cop and say, hey, I could end up losing my life behind this, right? You see, so if that's your upbringing, you see, that's ground zero where you're dealing from. And when that happened with the young man who was drunk, the whole conversation was just a normal conversation at first, remember?
It was.
I mean, they were talking just like, hey, you know, I was drunk. And you know, the cop was like, okay, yeah, I understand. It was a normal conversation.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, he tried to handcuff the guy.
And
when that happened, he flipped. Okay, now, you would normally say, okay, well, why did he act like that? Why didn't he just let the handcuffs get put on him? Okay, I guarantee you, the first thing that popped into his mind was, hey, they handcuffed Floyd, and you know how that ended up, right? Okay, if he gets these handcuffs on me, I'm dead.
That's right.
So it's fight or flight. He took off.
Yeah.
And the funny part about this entire thing is, over my career, you know who fights the police most? Honest to God, who fought the cops the most? Middle-aged white females.
Oh, yes, I believe that.
Hands down, middle-aged white females would go knockout, drag out with me 50 times more than anybody else would. So I'm sitting there going, it's the irony of going, everybody is talking, going, oh, we got to be afraid of minorities and they're gangbangers and this and that. And I'm like, Karen's the one fighting me in the middle of a Walmart parking lot.
Right.
Like, I literally had somebody stab a stiletto heel through my leg, like stab me with a heel one day because she was stealing her dog food and was not going to county for it. Like, it's a total paradigm shift when you have spent 10 years doing it and you look up and you're like, Karen's way more willing to fight you than anybody else. Everybody else is afraid of you.
Right. And they just want to get home.
Right.
Yep.
Right. They just want to get home.
And when you talk about, a systemic, racism, right? And when you talk about a mentality, it goes way beyond the police force. It goes way beyond law enforcement. It goes way beyond politics. It's really a psychological, a physical, and a spiritual thing for a lot of minorities. Only in the sense that when I was growing up in elementary school, and I mentioned this last time as well, but I'll expand on it now. That in elementary school, that's when they introduced Black History Month, right? But besides that, it was not in my educational system. I was not only taught about, a Eurocentric history, right? I was taught of how to be a citizen, right? And I could not see myself in the history books at all. And when I was discussed in the history books or what have you, there was racism within the education that I received. So, for example, one of the biggest things was, they were saying that Egypt was not a part of Africa.
Right.
Ever, right? And that if I wanted to see myself, I had to wait till Black History Month. And even then, it was only a minute amount of information. So I had to study a history that wasn't mine. I had to follow a program that wasn't mine. I had to follow anything from a diet to an education to a cultural perspective of someone else's history and not seeing myself in it for years. So basically, I'm programmed to follow a system that I'm not even in it. I'm not even in the history of the system that I'm now following on.
Yeah, and
it's Blade Runner.
Yeah, so, and on top of that, I mean, this is one of the things that's always been crazy for me as well, is they also had to pick the shortest month out of the year. And not that's, but again, when you look at it and you think about it and you go, okay, really? I mean, if you want to celebrate, if the irony in it, yes, to celebrate a whole month, you're not even getting 30 days.
Right. But it was
How,
29 every
how
4 years.
in 4 years, yes, you get an extra day. How
Right.
insane to think about that is. That's why I said it's crazy that we operate in a society and we still have to figure out a way to try to make everything work, because we still have to exist here.
Right.
We all have to exist here. And I want to hear Candace's opinion, because she's a millennial growing up in this society now. I want to see if she's got a different perspective on it, where you guys have grown up and then you've seen it all your life, of course. But maybe she's seen a little bit more inclusion, a little bit more diversity. So I want to hear what she has to say about that. Well,
I think she's coming.
oh,
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. So
okay, that's okay.
It's a bit delayed for me. So I've been trying to catch what everybody's been saying like the last 45 minutes. It's a little hard.
That's okay.
Because it's like it's skipping a bit. So I've been catching like here and there of what everybody's saying. But I actually had a question a while ago.
Yes,
and it was for Mr. Greg and Charles. So Charles, if I remember correctly, you said that when it comes to reform, there needed to be adjustments in hiring, or we needed to get the right people in and the bad people out.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm getting what you're saying correctly. And so for Greg and for Charles, what does that look like? Because see, the questions that we as young people are wondering is, how do you know if somebody is subconsciously have these internal have these feelings toward Black people because of skin color, or brown people, or whatever group of people? What does that, how do you test that? How do you look for that prior to somebody starting training at the police academy? I mean, do they make the mistake in police academy, or is this something how do you get the right people in if a lot of it is like a or subconscious bias?
This is a multifaceted question. There's a lot of decent human beings that will end up being bad cops because they get trained to be an idiot. You have to totally revamp how you train people. But you don't know, and that's the best way I'm going to tell you. 99% of the time, you're not going to know. The problem becomes once they're in and they're unioned and they have their FOP rep, you're never getting them out. It's backwards to think about this, but you want to be able to actually hold cops accountable, bust up the unions. Because the unions are the entire stopgap between the officers on the street and the corrupt politicians that just want to pay you nothing and make you work 90 hours a week. The unions are totally political. You look at 90% of FOPs, or whatever union you want, you have legal representation, you have arbitration, you have stuff that 90% of corporations don't have. The amount, what it actually takes for you to get fired if you are a union cop and you make it through your first year, make it through probation, you make it through your first year, you're untouchable. I'm not kidding when I say you as long as you can make it legal, and that is a phrase, make it legal, because there's enough laws, as long as you can make it legal, there's no way they're ever going to touch you. They can't. It took, and here's the other side of that. If you're a whistleblower cop, which is the entire reason I am no longer a cop and doing this, you will get the FOP on the other side, and that is almost more dangerous to you personally than anything else, because they will set you up, and they will. There's multiple cases. They will set you up, and you will either go to prison for the rest of your life, or you will end up on a very, very dangerous call without backup. Right. Which means, officer will got killed in the line of duty.
Right.
So sad. You know, everybody will cry at your funeral, and by Tuesday they forget about you, and they got rid of their problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
the thing that's exacerbated about this, you know, is, you know, now seeing it on the cell phone and stuff like that or what have you. But everybody knows it's been going, well, not everybody, but you know, it's been going on for centuries, right?
Yes.
And part of this notion that you see now with people fighting back or people doing things against the grain or rebellion or what have you, that also has been going on for centuries, is that, you know, there's this notion of a Black activist that said, you know, this is the hate that hate created, right? So when you see this back and forth, this battle in the streets, this frustration in the streets, this outrage or what have you that some may call it, it's really not necessarily a radical notion, because when you have this training of citizens that have been conditioned, because part of mentality, right? Part of this mental illness is a brainwashing, right?
Right.
So when I have, you know, one of the things that Malcolm X said is that, you know, in being a house Negro and the slave in the house with the slave owner, one of the things that they said was that, you know, oh, master's sick, I'm sick too, right? You know, we sick, right? You know, we sick. And when the slave owner would say something about his property, he would feel as though, oh, our property, right? Whereas the field Negro had a different perspective, right? Field Negro had an overseer officer.
Correct.
Right. And in some cases, that overseer was another African American that would oversee for the slave owner.
Yeah.
And when you fast forward that until today, you have the same type of tribalism that happens on the street corners. You have the same type of rebellion, right, for those who are in power, right? So when you say the word citizenship, it's kind of like, you know, yes, I am a citizen, but I've never seen democracy play out in its entirety, right? Yes, you can say, okay, I've seen some democracy play out, but have you seen it play out in its entirety? You know, yes, you know, I have a business, or yes, I have a job, or yes, I have a well-paying job, or what have you. But I still like feel swimming against the current.
Yes.
You know, I'm not swimming upstream.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, so how do we? So the thing of this discussion now is, how do we combat history? How do we combat a miseducation, right? How do we combat, you know, a lot of these things that have been put in place, right? How do we combat that? How do we deal with that? Because there is a ingrained notion that I'm scared to speak out. There is an ingrained notion that everything is okay because I have a good paying job. There is a notion that, you know, if I do say something, then I will get slammed on the hood of a car, you know, or what have you, right? There is this notion that, you know, if I move into a neighborhood or I drive into a neighborhood, you know, am I going to take somebody out with me? You know, I had to make that decision as a family man. If I get pulled over with by a police officer with my family, do I fight back or do I submit? And if I submit, do I get beaten? I have to, you know, it's been ingrained to me to think about these things that I shouldn't have to think about.
Yeah.
Right? So what is, so, you know, Greg mentioned a lot of things, you know, now what do we do about that?
Yeah, that kind of leads me into the next part of the portion where I wanted to head with this. So, you know, as we go forward, yes, we're opening these discussions. Yes, a lot of things are being learned, taught, filled. What is the next steps that we got to take, guys, when we want to talk about, first of all, healing, understanding, and then maybe at some point even looking at solutions? Because again, I think it's a very wide range of problems that we're all dealing with, that all have to deal with systemic racism. So what are some of the ways that we can actually start that process? Because again, it's great to talk about. It's great that we can bring this out. We can discuss it. But what can we actually start doing to kind of help get us in that direction? So I'll leave that open for you guys to put out there.
Yeah, Gabriel, first of all, when we talk about systemic racism, you're talking about an entire society.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the tip of the iceberg to look at a police department and say, why are policemen killing Black people? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Why is Karen calling the police, to come out for something,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? That shouldn't even be an issue.
Correct.
And why are the police coming out responding to Karen's call with deadly force? And then why do 3 cops stand there and watch 1 cop stand there and kill somebody with a knee on his neck? 3 people? Nobody thought, hey, wait a minute. This is way more force than this situation calls for. So it's not to just say, okay, how can we fix systemic racism? No, how can we fix a society
There you go.
that has gone off the rails?
You stop legislating morality.
Yeah, but you can't see, and this is the key thing. I'm just looking at her on screen. I'd be willing to bet that Annie doesn't want me out of her neighborhood, that she's not going to choke her dog and put in a call and pretend I did it.
Right.
To you, that probably sounds like insane stuff, right? Okay,
Right.
so
But it happens.
But it happens. Right, but it happens. And see, that's the thing that's crazy, is that we're not talking about everybody.
Right.
But there's an element of this society that has just gone totally off the rails, and it's causing problems not only for Black people, but for everybody else.
I told somebody this.
Well, I want to ask. Go ahead, Greg.
I went to a protest that ended up becoming a violent protest, right? 95% of the people at that protest, we marched down the state capitol and we went home. 5% marched down to police headquarters and started setting stuff on fire.
Right.
But that entire protest got deemed, like, there's 3 people that got charged with terrorism out of the deal. Like, that entire protest is now null and void because you had 15,000 people do it peacefully and you had less than 200 screw it all up.
Right. Right.
So go ahead.
And you can't, and listen, you can't legislate that out of people.
No,
you
understand?
can't.
You can write all the laws you want, but again, there's no law that's going to change the heart of people.
And you cannot
people are going to do what they're going to do regardless, regardless of the law. You see, and that's the problem. We're trying to fix this.
Yep.
And it's not fixable by legislation and all the ways that we're trying to do it. You can retrain the police force all you want. If you got 10 bad apples, you still got 10 bad apples.
10 bad apples.
Right. So, I mean, there's always going to be this notion of good and evil, right? I mean, since the beginning of time, right? It doesn't matter race, nationality, religion, or creed, right? So there's always this notion of good versus evil. That's going to stay. That's going to remain, right? But you can't let an imbalance happen, right? It has to be a balance, right? I mean, even within a person, you have 360 degrees. 180 degrees of us is positive and 180 degrees of us is negative. We got to choose between the difference between right and wrong, choose the difference between positive and negative every day when we wake up in the morning, right? So the notion of good and evil is always going to be here, but it's just about balancing that, right? Balancing that mental illness, right? You know what I mean? And changing the mentality. First, again, I go back to, education because my mother was an educator, you know what I mean? Educator in a different way. She was an educator in terms of grassroots. So she started off as a PTA president, and then she got onto the school board and then she became a House of Delegate. And she didn't have a political science degree, right? But she had a common sense degree.
Yep.
And one of the things that she told me was that, you know, a lot of geniuses don't have common sense, right? And so when you think in terms of acting out something that you think should be common sense, it has to be implemented in the educational system, right? It has to be filtered through the educational system, right? It's already filtered through maybe a religious system or what have you, but we have to filter it through an educational system where each identity of an individual sees themselves in society,
Right.
right? It has to be placed from that perspective. So I see that, you know, it has to change within the educational system, and it has to be inclusive of not just the history of one nationality, but the history of all nationality, and the balance needs to occur there first, I believe.
Right. I would like to put a question, if I could, to the entire panel.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We live in a country that tracks down Al Qaeda as a terrorist organization and tries to get rid of it, right?
Yes.
Track down the Taliban, try to get rid of it. Track down ISIS, try to get rid of it. But right here in our country, we have the Ku Klux Klan, who have been terrorizing ever since the Civil War.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're allowed to just operate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You have the Black Panther Party, who starts breakfast programs before school, starts free clinics. You understand? Social programs that are good. All right? And because they're marching with guns,
right,
which we saw people do marching down to the Capitol just a little while ago with guns, nothing happened to them, right? But the Black Panthers are basically exterminated.
Yes.
By the FBI. Okay, so how do you expect people of color to look at all the terrorist groups outside the U.S. who are being exterminated, look at a Black group inside the U.S. that was exterminated, and yet look at a group that's been terrorizing, as I say, since Reconstruction, and they're allowed to operate with impunity? You know, somebody on the panel explain that to me.
Well, you know, again, that can't be really explained. Obviously, we know that's completely ridiculous. You know, again, holding people accountable, holding our nation accountable. I always think about this, Charles, when, you know, yes, you just pointed out the terrorist groups. Then, you know, we're also doing hunger things for other countries. People are hungry here. Children need homes here. And I think, you know, what's interesting, what I have seen, because I've kind of been, you know, vocal in my own, but also, you know, quiet as well, because I'm really trying to really just honestly kind of absorb everything that I can, the negative and the positive. And I say that because, you know, I have a son. I am in my 40s, so I'm not, you know, a millennial or anything like that. I was raised by baby boomers, and I'm also adopted. And what honestly scares me is everything for him, like everything. I have done a lot of things. I didn't even realize that I bought a Peloton because I didn't want to run outside anymore with my stroller because I'm scared that somebody's going to run up on the sidewalk and hit me and my child.
Yeah. And that happened.
That's why, you know, because for me, you know, even quarantine right now, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but the problem is you just continue to feel unsafe. And who is going to keep your safety? I honestly feel it'll only be me, right, for my family, or that's it. There is nobody else, right? Who's going to keep my son safe if something happens? I don't know if, you know, I need to call the police for certain things. I actually had an issue at Kroger. I was in the line, and this guy in front of me thought that I was the one that put a sign on his car saying you can't park here. I was just in the line of the pickup line, right? So he was in the wrong line. He was in the pickup line when he should not have gone into the store. So he comes out, and my son is in the back. And I will be honest with you, I always have a 9mm on me at all times. I'm just going to be honest. I know I might not look like it, but I'm not playing any type of game.
Hey,
so
gotta do what you gotta do.
I do, and it is legal. So I have my firearm. It's on the side, and this guy comes up to me. And he's starting to cuss me out, throw up all these signs. And why would you? I had no idea what he was doing anyway. So I had a split second to say, if he comes any closer to me, what am I going to do? But what's going to happen to me, though? I'm going to go to jail, even though I have a concealed carry. I'm going to say, oh, I shot him because there's, a kid in the car. Then I'm endangering my kid. So then I called, Kroger, and I sound like this damsel in distress. And I'm like, somebody please come get this man because he's coming closer to me. And they did come and get him. But it was fear. I had nothing but fear and helplessness. I was like, what? I'm still protected. And I had to literally think, what is going to happen, even though I would be in my rights? What is going to happen to me? And again, to your point, Charles, is yes, we're out here, trying to defend other countries, other nations, other things, but we never come back home to where all of us are. And this is our home. We are Americans. All of us are Americans who have stepped on this soil. Obviously, indigenous is first, but we all are Americans. And I feel like we're just not paying attention in general. How does everyone feel? What are people going through? And honestly, I didn't even think about it, but Mike, I have been afraid.
Yeah. And you have to get your own stuff straight at home. Okay? Like grandma used to always tell me, clean your own room first. Okay? I can't be going to my neighbor's house talking about, man, your house is junky. Let me clean it up, and my stuff is raggedy at home. Okay. It's like, hey, man, first clean up your own stuff. Okay? Think about this. I mean, this is just a white kid's walking down the street with a hoodie on. And out of nowhere, a black person comes up, a black man, and starts chasing him down. The white kid runs because he don't know why this guy's chasing him, right? Mm-hmm. The black guy tackles the white kid with the hoodie on the lawn. They wrestle, and he shoots the white kid with the hoodie dead.
There would be a
does that black man get acquitted of that?
No.
Well, and if I can say something,
go ahead.
I want to take it to a potential solution, right? And I've been extremely, over the last 3 to 4 years, I've been beyond passionate about completely replacing the education system. The education system is broken in so many ways, it's not even fun. Exactly. And the way that they label children at a very young age desensitizes them to labels. It also points out differences between people. It makes us see differences, and we start pointing them out enough, right? And rather than pointing out differences, we need to thrive on our differences. We need to appreciate the differences, but we need to completely rebuild the education system. Absolutely. And this is not something that will be fixed overnight. This is not a problem. Systemic issues, not only racism, but any of the systemic issues, all go back to the core foundation of our education system being broken.
And parenting.
And parenting. But again, that goes back to education also, right? Because if the parents didn't learn properly, how can they teach properly?
You're right.
So when you look at the education system, and let's say, what I've learned is history is whitewashed, and from America, we have an American bubble on our history, and we don't show the world approach of it, right? Like even our American history that we learn in school, from what I remember of it, I wasn't great in school. I didn't really pay attention, but from what I remember of it, it was one of those things that we never looked at the world view of it. We only cared about our bubble. Right. And over the last generations, we've created this enormous U.S. bubble. Mm-hmm. And now we have no choice with social media but to look at our own issues.
Yeah.
And we're avoiding them to every extreme. Absolutely. And now with the coronavirus and quarantine, now we're seeing additional loopholes in the education system, where we always thought all this technology was being pushed into it, which at the end of the day, here in Arkansas, which I'm still here, unfortunately, they handed out paper packets. Like, I mean, they reverted the education system back to what they learned the first quarter of the school year. How is that an education system? How is this supposed to be the most powerful country in the world? And we can't even teach our students if they're not in a classroom.
Right.
And what they and if they're giving us 2 hours of work to do each day with each one of our kids, what are they doing the other 6 hours in school? And it's not the teacher's fault. The teachers are killing themselves, right? The teachers are putting so much effort into communication and trying to understand and trying to deal with over amount of students in their classroom, that with a technology backbone, it would be simplified. With a technology backbone, they'd be able to streamline their process. And they're missing that point. They're not looking at this as a real solution. And the education system needs to be rebuilt, restructured to the point that it gives everyone a fair chance from day one.
Right.
The socioeconomic issues are enormous because they have worse school systems. They have more children in classes.
Right.
And yet those are minority areas. And you can call it whatever you want, right? Whether it's targeted, whether it's on purpose, whether it's intentional. When this system was when our systems were built, minorities were different, and the geography of this country, the demographic of this country was completely different, right? And now it's never evolved.
Yeah,
it turns into something bigger than that too, because we were just talking like education and parenting. Well, if you go look at legislation, the drug war has drastically affected minorities way harder than it ever affected white people. I mean, the crack epidemic of the late 70s and early 80s totally destroyed a bunch of minority families, and you're still having that today.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of theory about it. I mean, they made a movie about it. I don't think it's a secret anymore. There was a lot of that started by our own government.
Exactly.
There was a lot of the drug epidemic started by our own
it's
the whole San
Gabe,
Diego thing, right?
It's worse, Gabe. We're doing a project right now in Watson, Compton, and I've been working with the former Crips and Bloods leaders, the actual guys that created the famous gang truce. Do you remember that in the 90s?
Yeah, right.
Those guys came to me and said, we want to try to rebuild South Central from the inside out. And you guys may or may not know the stories. I'm sure you do, but here you have the start of gangs back then, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night on the railroad tracks, train cars showed up filled with military guns. It just appeared overnight in the middle of the worst black neighborhoods. Really? Who sent those and why? And as these guys were telling me, guns mysteriously appeared. Nobody was armed before that. And now you have all this black on black crime. Everybody's killing each other because somehow, magically, instead of fixing the systemic problem, maybe somebody somewhere thought, let's just let them all kill each other.
That's their solution, right?
Oh yeah, this is really deep. And Rick's point, well, what Mike was just saying about the schools, it's not just the education we teach. So I went and we go visit schools a lot. I was visiting school recently in East Cleveland, in the worst part of town, right? And it's an almost completely non-white, it's almost an all-black area, but the school itself I asked to use the restroom before I talked to the students. I went in there, 6 urinals, 5 are broken. I said, hey, almost all the bathrooms broken, and they laughed. And I said, well, is someone going to fix that? And a child said to me, you must be joking, Mr. Hoffman, we are the forgotten. He said, I'll bet all the bathrooms work at the schools near where you live. And he said, but no one's coming here to fix anything. So the attitude, as Rick was saying, these kids already believe we're not part of this society. We're not welcome. We're not cared about. It's really deep. And one last quick thing. When you talked about the family, we've been teaching entrepreneurship in prisons. We recently did classes in Folsom. And a lot of these people tell me, right, I didn't grow up this way, but I asked them, tell me the start, why you got in gangs. And you know what they told me? Because Rick said something about the traditional family. They say, a lot of them say, I joined a gang because it's the only family I've ever had, right? So it's deep, right? If you don't feel welcome in society, in the country, and you don't feel like you have a traditional family that supports you, you're starting off with way behind, with so much disadvantage. So it's not surprising at all that we wind up where we are. And that's why Mike's right. We got to start way back when they're kids. We got to start way sooner addressing this problem with children so they don't grow up the way you guys had to grow up. They don't feel the way you felt growing up.
So how do we go
ahead, Gabriel.
I was just gonna say, how do we address that when we fix a problem like this, where we have an education system based on local governments, state governments getting money like a turnstile? The more kids, the more kids.
Listen, first of all, everybody who has been in the school system knows you get money for how many heads are in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
How many butts are in the seat? Every butt in the seat is money.
It's money.
Okay, so that's the first thing. You can always tell about a society. You can tell about a family. You can tell about anything by where they put their money.
Money, yes.
Okay, and we have a society that would rather spend more money on bombs, right?
Yeah.
More money on all this other stuff except people.
Exactly. Even right now, here's the thing, right? A lot of these schools are going to be opening up again. They're talking about opening up in the middle of a pandemic, sending children to go into schools because they need the funding. That's more important. That's more important than the health and the safety.
The teachers don't even want to go.
Exactly. The teachers don't want to go. And yet here we are getting ready to say, okay, we're going to partially open schools, and then we're going to see how it goes. We're going to sacrifice a certain set of children to go to school to guinea pigs to see if this is going to work. How insane is that to think about as a parent? Go, oh my God, I got to think about this in terms of, and I get it. Some families, it's a necessity. I get it. I know that there's two parents that have to work. They got to find a way to put their kids. They got to find a way. But also, I mean, what is the ultimate concern here?
Yeah.
Is it the dollar or is it the child?
And I'll say this to everybody on this panel. The first thing we have to realize before we start to look for an answer is that there are people in this world, and unfortunately, a lot of them are in government, who are not out for your best interest at heart. That's the first thing you have to realize. You know, we look at it and we go, okay, well, anybody in their right sense, would do what's right. They wouldn't send children into harm's way. They wouldn't do, but you have to stop and realize that there are not only people who don't have your best interest at heart, but there are systems and there are companies, you understand? And corporations who don't have your best interest at heart. They put profit over you any day.
Yeah, prison systems.
So when we go to fix anything, the first thing we have to realize is there are people out there who don't want us. You understand?
Because you know, here's the transition, you know, to that, you know, and I think this is a good example of a solution that's happening now. It shouldn't happen because of what's going on, you know, with the protests in the street. But okay, let's look at the Redskins story, right?
Okay. Yes.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
So we've heard and we know that, okay, FedEx Field, around from where I used to live in, you know, Prince George's County, Maryland, right? FedEx Stadium, right? And Nike is telling the owner of the Redskins that you need to change the name.
Right.
He didn't want to change the name for years. There's been Native Americans protesting that name for years. Why didn't he change it then? Right? Money, right? Because FedEx knows and Nike knows that African Americans and their white counterparts who are out there protesting are not going to put their butts in the seats, right? Because they know that economical power, the importance of, number one, going back to what Mike said and I said earlier, each one teach one, number one. And part of that solution of each one teach one, and that concept is that if I educate you about the economics of what's going on and how this plays out, then you're not going to spend your money in that stadium, right? So I would like to ask, Candace about this or whatever, is that, what is the word out in the streets about, about moving towards economics and what is the word out there? What are they talking about out there in terms of rearranging the distribution of wealth? Can you hear me?
She has a delay.
Yeah, she's got the delay.
Oh, okay.
It's taking her a minute to get.
Right.
Oh, who was that for?
Rick was asking you a question.
Okay, I didn't hear that entire question.
Oh, no problem. I was wondering, what is the heartbeat that you're hearing, from your generation about the redistribution of wealth? Some are calling it the defund, right? Which I think may need to change the name on that, but understanding the concept is what matters. So in terms of the reallocation of funds, right? What are they talking about in the street, and what are they talking about in terms of your generation? Because one example I just gave earlier was the Redskin scenario and how this can change based upon what we decide to spend our money.
So when you speak about the Redskins, I didn't read up on that story. Are they trying to get the name changed? If I'm getting clarity or something like that?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So like everybody that's out in the streets, like, don't care about the extra stuff, like the names, the removing Aunt Jemima, all this other stuff. Like, we don't care about that. Like, we're caring about systems getting changed. Like that's what we care about. Like, we don't care about nobody saying the N-word. Like, all of this stuff is irrelevant because you're not dealing with the foundational issue. That's really what it's about. So the changing words in the national anthem, none of that is really addressing the real issue. And so when it comes to what we've been protesting about as far as defunding the police, well, we want that money to go there was a small feat in California. I think we got around $150 million taken away from the police department, and those funds be allocated. So when it comes to that, what we are looking at and what we want is for there to be money invested in mental health in minority communities. One thing that I think to address what Mr. Charles was talking about and what you were talking about as well, Rick, is that education is vitally important, but you got to get these kids to also pay attention in school. And it's like my mom, she is a teacher at a poor school. So I hear the stories every day. Like you have to deal with what these kids are going through at home. So I think that mental health and changing the stigmas of how the Black community really views mental health and therapy. You need to get Black women therapy that are raising these children. You need to get Black men therapy that is feeling the pressures of society and the fear of having to deal with police officers and being a part of the system. We're all, as a community, dealing with traumas, and so that is it's more of a mental issue that needs to be addressed, and then we can move on to these other things, because you got broken Black women that are raising these kids. So how are these kids supposed to pay attention in school?
Correct.
They feel forgotten about, but like they look at the community they are raised in. I know, because I was in these communities. Like, I was raised in it. The only difference between me and them was that I came from a 2-parent household. So they angry, they mad. Those are the ones that I identify with. Like, I understand that there's education and everything else, but you got to deal with these kids and how they're feeling emotionally and mentally. They are literally born into trauma.
Right.
So what do you do from there?
Yeah.
Right.
I tell you about. Go ahead.
No, go.
Yeah. Okay. I tell you about talking about allocating money. When I was a teenager, Greg, in our neighborhood, they had what was called the police leagues. I played baseball. Every precinct sponsored their own baseball team. The baseball team was coached by officers, right? Officers were responsible for picking up the kids and transporting them to games. Okay. They mentored the kids. So all of this was money being put into the community, and all these kids who were probably 80% from single parent households, right? So my upbringing was not to be terrified of the police because these guys coached me every week.
You had a connection to it.
I had a connection. I knew the officers by names.
Because I've told people this, and I don't want cops doxxed, but I have seen this, there's two sides of this. I've seen this in person. Police don't live in the neighborhoods they police anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
They mostly, I don't, even if you get a minority officer, they live in upper to middle upper scale neighborhoods because they have the benefits and the paychecks to do it, versus used to be your cop could live next door to you. Versus you had a human connection to it.
Right.
And it's like,
because that's a different thing. That's a good point, because again, if we have our representatives who represent us in local governments and our state government, they have to live in the districts that they represent.
Right.
I'm gonna tell you this one about that. Because I can go point, and I can't prove it, or it wouldn't go anywhere anyway. I can tell you 5 state house reps that live in, or that represent urban minority districts that don't live there. They have a mailing address there.
Mailing address.
Wow.
And they live like in Oklahoma City. Edmond and Nichols Hills, the Beverly Hills of Oklahoma City. Like, you will see Lamborghinis and Rovers, and it's money. It takes a lot of money to live there, especially now, where they have a mailing address in an urban area.
How are we supposed to trust these people then?
You don't.
That's because again, if we, this is
Gabriel? Do you?
Like, you can't, because
in my heart of hearts, I want to see the good in people. I really do. I spend my time looking for the best in every single person until they give me a reason not to. But hearing and saying these things sometimes is very disheartening. To think about that, these are the people that are supposed to represent my best interest. If I'm going to sit here and say to somebody, hey, let's go out and get the vote. Let's get this person in because they're going to represent us the best way possible. And yet
they will abandon you to lobbyists faster than you can vote.
Right.
And that's
right.
And the problem becomes,
we're talking about
you get
broken systems,
millennials,
right?
Like, you get millennials who, this is my opinion, we are the most accepting generation in history. We don't care who you want to sleep with or what you want to do or what you want to do with your body. And every year in Europe, they prove it. There's a music festival called Tomorrowland, and they get 500,000 to 600,000 people and from all over the world, and nobody cares. And let's get honest, there's drugs and there's sex and it's everywhere. And you know how many people die? There's not any. Like, millennials are the most accepting generation in history. And you know why we get literally, I've ran for office 4 times. I've lost the 2 big ones because I couldn't get enough donors, because I would not want to legislate morality, or I couldn't get the lobbyist groups behind me. I couldn't get this. Well, you're just a disenfranchised millennial. No, I don't care what you do when you go home. I don't care what you do with your life as long as you don't hurt me. And that whole mindset is coming. Like, everybody starts, the right or the left wants to talk about, oh, we're going to stop this movement. No, you're not. You're absolutely not, because what happened and what has happened over the last couple of years that culminated with George Floyd, you're not going to stop that, because people are sick of it.
I'm in the middle of this.
There's a generation that we're now paying taxes. We're now going to work. We're now voting. Yeah. We're not going to stand for the same stuff that everybody else stood for.
I believe it. And there's an avalanche, and I'll let you go, Candace. I'm just saying that you're talking about you're not going to stand for it. And I believe that, I see something in the streets with your generations that has never happened before, and I mean, I grew up with my parents, and I'm part of the, the civil rights movement, but there is something going on out in the streets right now that we've never seen before. See, but what we have to realize is this, and I'll let you go. The hate groups have to have hate in order to exist.
Yeah.
You understand? If nobody's hating, then those hate groups will disappear.
And there's no signs.
So, yeah, so people who have that perspective have to keep hate going or they become obsolete. And that is what I see as the problem. My generation thought, you know what, one day there's not going to be any more prejudice. There's not going to be any more biases because the children or grandchildren of all these people who are hating are going to grow up and they're not going to hate like their parents and grandparents did. But we're seeing young people in their teens and 20s who are still a part of hate groups and still hating. So it's not just that just by osmosis or just by time going on, it's going to go away. You know, that element is always going to be there until, like you're doing now, there's enough of you who get in the streets and say, you know what, squash all of this.
Right.
See, and that's what I'm seeing now. It's not just black people doing it.
Everybody.
They're white people, they're Native Americans, they're Asians. Everybody's in the street saying, hey, man, we had enough of this stuff. That's what it's going to take.
Well, and for me, the biggest difference is social media. Everybody has their own power to be their own media agency, right? I mean, it's pretty apparent that if we look across America right now, there's a left and a right side that are more extreme than ever. And this isn't a political conversation about choosing sides. The reality is everybody has their own media station. When I want to see real news about what's really going on out there, I go to TikTok Live, I go to Instagram Live, I go to Facebook Live.
Or you come here. Right?
Or here, right?
Or you come here, right? Because this is why essentially what you're saying perfectly.
But this is the truth, right? Because you're having 10 people come together, 9 people, 8 people, whatever it is, come together, all share perspectives and knowledge and their own personal wisdom. This is educational material.
Correct.
This needs to be in schools because this can change lives. Because whether you're in the upper class in a white privileged school, whether you're in a minority school at the lower end of the class structure, if everybody listens to this, there's a better chance that everybody has the compassion and empathy to be able to understand better and be able to look at this from a more democratic principle, right?
Yeah, because I think
Mike, we got to get a handle on the social media because the flip side of that is cowards hide behind it, right? It's easy to spit 100%. Hate if you can hide and pretend you're not even the person you are. So, you know, I hope that this especially this next generation coming up starts to realize that it's a responsibility, that being a coward and hiding behind social media to say things you wouldn't have the guts to say if you had to say them in front of people. I hope that we can work on that with our children as well. That's so much bullying and all these other things are happening.
Yeah. But real talk. Listen, real talk is this. Black lives are not going to matter until you say they matter, Mike. Until you say they matter, Greg. Until you say they matter, Jeff, Annie. You know, that's what has to happen. Because you know, any one group, you can't depend on the oppressed group, right?
No.
To make that change thing because it's taking the people who are oppressing them are the ones who have to say, hey, you know what? What's happening there is not fair.
You got it.
100%.
Yeah, and again, and I know because I'm going through it too with the Latino and the Hispanic with the Latino and the Hispanic culture.
Right.
We're going through it now. Instead of calling it black, we're immigrant.
Right.
So we are getting treated in the same way. I mean, kids are being held in cages at borders, right? Tied up, wondering how the hell, what am I supposed to be doing with my life right now? Waiting on whatever legislators feel is going to free them, right?
And that's where, you know, and that's the point I was driving, you know, kind of home earlier was that to finish on the point I was trying to make earlier was that, you know, that is education. Everything, like Mike said, that we're talking about now, is an education, because like, Charles' experience with the police officers and doing the baseball coaching and stuff like that, that is an education. You know what I mean? That is a mentorship. Going back to what Candace said or whatever, though, mental illness or whatever, those are type of things that we can include with the communities that we live in and the communities that we don't live in. I bring my daughter back around to where I used to live and how I used to grow up. I show her pictures of how I grew up. I tell her things and I give her the experience of how I grew up, so she understands that here is a diversity, but here is an area where people didn't necessarily have this type of opportunity that you have now.
Yeah.
Understanding your demographics and understanding where you live and how to deal with where you live and how to handle certain things a certain way. And when it comes to, making change, I have decided to put my money in different areas and put my money where it counts. If you look at, this whole dynamic of FedEx and Nike's telling and dictating, hey, look,
well,
if you don't change the name of your base football team, then you're not going to have our money at all.
Yeah. So let me get this real quick, guys. It's almost time to wrap up. It's almost been 2 hours. So just final thoughts real quick on everybody about what they feel they've learned here today. So let me start with you, Jeff, because I know you got to run. So kind of tell me what you think about the conversation.
I think it's been really great, and I just want to say that last point is absolutely right. That you can't count on the oppressed to unoppress themselves, right? He was exactly right. For Black people to say Black Lives Matter, of course they're going to say that. It's when everybody else says that and means it, which is why I am not Black, and I am here tonight with you guys when you called, because we're not going to fix this unless we all do it together. So I think for me, that was the most important point coming out of this is, people that look like me got to stand up and say this matters and then got to do something about it. That's why we're here. We talked about the bad news tonight, but it isn't all bad news. There actually are some people that want to make this better, and we're here to do it together.
I'm looking at 7 of them right now. So to be able to do this, first of all, that shows me that you have heart, compassion, empathy to want to make this world a better place. So I'm grateful for each one of you coming on here and sharing that with us, because again, it is that olive branch that we need, and we all want to. I mean, I think in our heart of hearts, we all want to just live life as people, right? I don't want to live my life as I'm Hispanic. I want to just be a person.
That's right.
I just want to be somebody. I don't want to wake up every morning and say, that's my biggest concern is I'm alive, I'm a person, let's go. Right? That's the way that I think all of us want to live our lives. And I think that's the struggle for us to understand. Each one of us is of color is that all we want is the same thing. We want to be able to do the same thing you guys get to do. And it's not that we're calling it out, but that's what we want. And that's how I want to spend the rest of my life. So I would hope everybody else here too. So Courtney, let me hear from you on what you've taken out of this whole conversation this evening.
Well, what's interesting is I usually only have these conversations, obviously, with my close counterparts, right? My close friends. And obviously, I'm sure all of you will become close friends. But what's great about this is, again, everybody was represented. Everybody was able to say what they feel as well as what they've experienced. And then we also kind of, came up with even a fragment of a solution. And I do feel like these conversations need to happen. I do think that, Mike, this is an educational conversation. And this is what has to happen in order to bring awareness. These are the things that aren't happening. And, like on CNN, are they having discussions like this with people that all look like us? Right? No, they don't. I'm just bringing up CNN. I'm not.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, where are we? Where are we in the media? Right? So now I feel like, Gabriel, you've really created a great, you know, kind of channel or whatever here. And maybe that is us.
Yeah. And it's just, this is what I strive to do. And I've had conversations with some of you one-on-one, and that's the whole point of why I wanted to create these forums, why I wanted to create this forum in the first place, so that I could have a voice, so I could share my channel with the voices that need to be heard, because we've been silent too long.
Yes.
Right? It's too long. And social media is the biggest, fastest way to build your voice. Yes, there is a bad part about it, like Jeff said.
Yeah.
But my focus is on the good things that we can do with it. It is a powerful tool if put in the right hands.
Okay.
And don't let the other people sway what you are, what you do, and tell you how to do it. Only you have the power to do that. Only you have the power to create what you want to teach other people. And if you're teaching other people, that means there's out there people to learn, and they will learn. But it all starts with us doing this and having these conversations. So Rick, Ben, thank you so much as well. Tell me kind of what you walk away with from
no
this.
problem. You know, I think that what we have said is very important. I have peers who have died from what, you know, things like Greg have said, you know, things like Mike have said, things that Charles have said, Candace, you know, Courtney, everybody. You know, I have peers who have died and passed away from that fight, right? And they were held accountable and killed for speaking their minds, you know, saying the same things that we have said here tonight. And we have to keep saying them, regardless of the danger, or regardless of who thinks there's a danger, you know, because it's not a myth, right? And understanding that we have to use our financial power, our educational power, our spiritual power, you know, our platforms to make this change. Because it's really about, right now, the heart of racism, real racism, is economics and education.
Always.
You know, because, you know, the slave owner did not care about who was the slave necessarily. They needed, you know, their plantation run. It was those who did not have the money who focused on skin color and skin type and stuff like that, because they wanted to be like the upper echelon and the upper crust, right? But where you place your money, where you spend your time, where you give education, and who you give education to, and how you use your platform is very important. And I think that's the takeaway, and that's a solution from where we should move forward. And I welcome many more of these, and I appreciate you for having me on.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Charles.
All right. Well, again, thanks for having me on, Gabriel. I appreciate it. You and Mike. Listen, my grandmother raised me this way. She said, there are two kinds of people in the world.
My phone's about to die, so.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Candace.
All right.
So
Good
sorry.
people.
I don't want it to cut off.
Go ahead, Candace.
Everything.
Thank you so much for your time, Candace.
Sorry. I don't want it to cut off. It's literally about to die. But
okay.
No, I just thank you for having me on. You know, hopefully you invite me back and I get to make some more points. However, I think that Black people need healing, and that's it. I will always be a warrior for the underprivileged Black community, because those are the voices that get lost. So the people that's out in the street, the people, my friends that are viewed as threats, you know, my friends that are baby moms, that are, you know, I believe that poverty is on purpose, and my friends, my community, the people that I speak to every day are the ones that are victims of this system. And so those are the people that I fight for. Those are the voices that I don't want to get lost.
Yes.
I understand everything is being done through social media, but my friends that live in the streets of, you know, of Memphis, Tennessee, those are the people that I want to move ahead when all of this is over with, when the hype is over with and everything else.
Yes.
Those are the people that I fight for. So
just real quick, everybody.
Yeah,
just real quick before you gotta go. This forum is always open to any of you. Just so you know, I've created this forum to do this. So any one of you, again, anytime, I will have you back on. We will have these discussions in groups or one-on-one. It doesn't matter. But this is the forum to do it from. And this is why I've created it. And it will can grow, because we cannot be silent. We got to talk. We have voices. That's what we're supposed to use them for. Right? So thank you, Candace, so much for taking your time. I know you got to run. I know your phone's going to die. Again, all the gratitude in the world. I will reach out to you again. Thank you so much
but I don't want it to cut off on y'all.
All right, Candace.
Y'all be blessed.
Right,
Thank
Candace.
you.
Yes. Stay blessed. Stay safe.
Bye.
All right. Let's go ahead and finish, Mr. Greg, real quick. Go ahead and finish what you were your point there, Mr. Sir.
Charles.
Mr. Charles. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. Yeah. Just real quick. Again, as I say, my grandmother raised me. Said there are two kinds of people in the world: good people and bad people, and they come in all colors.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So that, I mean, that's where I live my life. You know, your color doesn't make you good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
What you do makes you good or bad.
Right.
You see, so if you're a good person, then stand up for what's right and for what's good. So if I see you being oppressed, I don't care who you are, I'm going to stand up for you.
Yes.
You know, and that's the way it works. So if everybody has that mentality, you know, it's a whole different world. I can't oppress you because when I oppress you, I oppress myself.
Yes.
As well. If I hold you as a slave, I got to stand there and watch you so you don't get away, right? So I'm in slavery too. We're both slaves, really. You know, so that's what I see coming out of this whole conversation tonight. And I think it was great because we disprove what so many people think. Oh, we're going to get on here. They're going to shame all the people who are white. All of the black people are going to get emotional and scream and yell at people. We didn't do any of that. We didn't do any of that. We had an intelligent conversation and everybody said some great stuff moving forward. So thanks again, Gabriel, and to the whole panel. Hey, definitely, let's do it again.
Let's do it again. So, Mr. Greg, let's go with you real quick. Final thoughts.
I think what we've started here and what has been started in the last 3 or 4 months is going to drastically change the world.
Yes.
If we don't let it die.
Right.
You know, I live my life by a phrase. It's live today, love tomorrow, and unite forever.
Beautiful.
This has the ability to do it.
Beautiful.
And I can tell you, I can't tell you a lot of it, but there are more and more cops that I'm talking to, and it's not just going to be me.
Yeah.
There's more and more that are starting to look around going, what
are we doing?
Like, why am I here? So it's these discussions and these roundtables and these talks and getting people from different parts of the country and different socioeconomic places and different skin colors and origins and types and races and sexuality. The only way that we unite forever is if we humanize each other.
That's right.
And this is exactly what we're doing.
Yes. Mr. Mike, final thoughts, Mr. Padurano?
Sorry, I was on mute. As I'm dealing with the 3 kids that definitely believe that I've been on for too long. The reality is, right, this is just a beginning phase. This is what's been started, like everybody here has already agreed, will never stop. And social media will perpetuate itself. The difference between the bullying that started on social media in the beginning of social media in 2008, I gotta say, the younger generation rallies around each other and protects each other. They stand up for each other. You see one bully come out and get attacked, that person that got attacked doesn't have to say a word because there is 500 people banging down that person's door.
Yes.
This is truly a united front with this younger generation, and it is amazing to watch. And the reality is, until some of these systems change, I guess we need the people to change in the meantime. And maybe that's just cycling through some people, right? Like, I mean, people are getting sorted out, called out. You know, you can look at it in a political way. You can look at it in an age way. You can look at it any way you want, right? But the old thought processes are disappearing. And they don't have a choice anymore because they're being suffocated. Like groups like this that refuse to stay silent.
Absolutely.
I was not able to sit by and stay silent any longer. And that's the reason that me and Gabe came together to do this, right? when we had that discussion, the same moment at the same time, we both knew that we had to have these roundtables.
I mean, I heard somebody else say it, and I got to give them credit. They're the one that said, I wish more people who had these forums would use them to bring the light. And that was the light bulb moment. And I was actually on somebody else's live streaming show, and he was watching it at the same time. We weren't even together, but we had the same idea. That moment in time said, something's got to be done. That's where I put together this whole forum and said, let's run with it. Because what else? What's the point of having this and putting it together if I can't use it as an instrument? It's an instrument to use to not only help, heal, and educate, but it's also to build voices for other people to do the same.
Absolutely.
This is why I offer it to so many people. Yes, it's my show, but guess what? That's why it's my show, so I can do these things and offer people. I've told people I don't have to be front and center for an issue to be brought forward.
Absolutely.
I've had other people come on the show. You want to run a show? You want to interview? You want to do that? It's yours. I take care of all the technical part. I just need your message. I need your voice. And that's what I'm creating. And it's something that's going to keep building and building and building till I have enough people, till I have an army of people who believe the same thing, who then at that point can go out and say, you know what? We are the difference.
That's right.
You have to hear us for. You cannot ignore us anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's what I concentrate on. And it's what I spend my days so much. And that's my price that I pay every single day, whether somebody would threaten me or not. I don't care. To me, this is what's important. This is what's more important. If I'm going to live my life this way, this is what I got to do. I got to wake up every day and I got to live with this. I got to have integrity to do this.
Yes.
So I don't wane. So I don't run. I don't let fear. There's none of that anymore. So this is what I do. And this is why I say every time, I'm so gracious for every single one of you to take the time to do this.
Absolutely.
Because it just helps me. So thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your evening. Like I said, all the gratitude in the world. You guys are the lifeblood of what I do. And thank you so much again. And I will be having conversations with each one of you. And thank you again to my partner, Mike, and everybody else who was on the panel that had to leave. You guys have made this wonderful, and you continue to make these wonderful, and they get better every single time. So Courtney, Rick, Charles, Mike, Greg, you guys have a great night. And say that thing one more time, because that was poignantly put, how you said that saying. I think I want to start using that because it makes a lot of sense.
It is the actual theme phrase of the music festival I was talking about earlier. It's live today, love tomorrow, and unite forever.
That is beautiful, and that's the best way I want to go live my life. So thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody who's been watching the show, everybody that hung on, going through the technical difficulties. This is part of doing a live streaming show, but this is why I do these, and this is why I love creating shows and creating this thing for you every night. So, guys, I will be back tomorrow, 7 o'clock, same Central Standard Time with my guest, Jason Cutter. For everybody else, thank you so much. Everybody just sit tight real quick, and then I'll let everybody go out here. I just want to tell you one more time, thank you so much. So, bye-bye, everybody.
Peace.